Okay, so now it should be streaming.
Based off of your phone?
Yes, it's gonna be streaming right now. If you wanna check that computer to like double check. It should be.
Come on, bud. Go to YouTube.
Yeah, the internet's not like loading for me right now.
Try it soon.
I think it's good, but I don't know if there's volume. But
Alright.
when you
Like it's literally not yet loading up YouTube. Yeah.
okay, well, I think it's working. After about an hour of attempts, I think we're good. All right. So looks like we have volume finally. Yes. So it looks like there's like a volume bar registering, so we're gonna see. All right, here we go. So the first thing I'm gonna do is just a little quick re-oiling of this painting. And I'm using that 50/50 linseed oil mixture. And what I look for is if there's like a change in the darks. Sometimes these darks go a little bit matte. It's like weird, I can hear myself. I'm just gonna turn this volume down. Okay. Ugh, technology. Am I right? Okay, so to resolve this painting, golly, what am I gonna do first? I think the first thing I'm gonna do is what I normally do is to mix up a little drawing mixture of a couple of different colors, dark transparent colors. You can see I've got that quinacridone and a little bit of ultramarine blue and maybe even a little bit of Prussian blue, and just kind of mixing those together sort of roughly so that maybe there's areas that are a little bit more quinacridone or a little bit, I might even do like a little sap green in here. Just want to neutralize this a little bit. And there's so much quinacridone that I think the sap green is going to make a nice neutralizing color. That's good. All right, so it's very transparent, and I use some of my 50-50 mixture. I'm just going to squirt that right onto the palette. Here is my brush getting that kind of loosened oil mixed in. And now we're going to get into sort of drawing and just like establishing the darks a little bit. Any areas that we can kind of just unify, maybe with a little glaze or like an edge that we can sort of pick out with this darker color. I'm wiping off the brush. So it's very light paint at this moment because I've just started working into this session. So we're just going to keep it really light. I'm just kind of creating almost like a little sense of sculpting or, you know, chiseling out in terms of like the depth. So it's a pretty big brush, and I'm just really trying to accurately tone down and deepen certain areas of color. But I want to switch brushes because it's too big. For like a lovely, what is that? I think it's like the Evergreen from Rosemary and Company. It's so fancy. It's so pretty. All right, so once again, just we're continuing to just kind of chisel around with like a darker color, and it's a fairly dark neutralized green color. It's got a little bit of quinacridone in it, and I can just go in with this really thin layer of paint, and I'm keeping it thin so that I can keep working on it today. So instead of starting with like really thick, opaque, very heavy paint, I'm just gonna kind of take it light. Just to emphasize certain leaves and little marks, I sort of need to place more effective, deeper dark colors right next to those colors. And I think this is such a fun moment in the process of painting when you get to just sort of like, I'm not terribly focused on the actual subject, I'm more focused on the painting itself. And you get to kind of like create these little abstract patterns that run through the shape. All right. I mean, I think these little marks are pretty effective in that they're breaking up these larger value areas and they're kind of hinting at like more complexity, more things happening in these areas. So we're just sort of building and building and building. And I feel like each layer we sort of branch out the value pattern. So we might start fairly mid-value and now we're gonna work on that separation. And I don't want to linger too much in one area. Again, I'm kind of trying to spread these marks around so that they feel natural. I'm kind of using that, you know, opportunity to redraw a little bit. I might go in here and try to create some more specific little pink flowers that I'm seeing in here. I really want these to kind of cascade backward a little bit and just fall back into the background. I just made that mixture like a little bit more quinacridone. And I wiped my brush so that I want to create some like kind of flick marks with the brush that help me soften. I don't want to be outlining everything. I know it looks like I'm starting with outline, but then I really have to like kind of flick that outline away from the object in order to create just a little bit of a more natural looking edge. There's all this dark in here. So, you know, layer by layer, I'm beginning to get more committed to the dark shapes that I'm building here. But if I kind of start that too early, if everything gets too dark too quickly, then you don't really have any opportunity for creating a little subtlety within that shape. So yeah, I'm trying to like actively think of ways to put this paint on that is not going to be static or just kind of paint by numbersy. I want to have some, you know, I think the way that you put the paint on the surface can actually be pretty interesting and kind of dynamic. So I want to have some movement, some purpose with the direction of the marks, that even in this kind of just darker support, build something up and use it for something. I'm still kind of transparent colors, but I do feel like the paint is getting a little bit dried out. That oil goes so quickly, so I just put a little more on the palette, and I just thought I would narrate that. To really decide about this lower right hand corner, and I think I'm deciding to finish it more entirely. So we're looking overall at the symmetry of this vessel. We can't have this vase go out of whack right now. We gotta keep that looking either mysterious or correct. Or mysteriously correct. Either one. I'll settle for mysteriously correct. Yeah, that seems better. I thought, and we've talked about this quite a bit at the studio in classes. We've talked about like leaving some like unfinished area very intentionally and how beautiful that can be. And I always say it's so much harder than you think it might be to leave an area unfinished. It's just a chess game, really. You kind of have to have everything support that and still look resolved and attended to, and it's not easy. So I just filled in that area that I thought might be a good candidate for leaving unfinished, and I think it is better filled in. So all right. Let's see. Before I get completely out of this dark transparent mixture, we're just going to go back a little bit. Mix up a little bit more quinacridone, magenta, ultramarine blue, sap green. All right. I want to work a little bit more in this method. It's just so effective to like pop things into the background. You can really easily get kind of sucked into other areas of the painting and get distracted by, I started filling this in and creating some like really strong reds in here. But I'm going to get back on this program and we're going to work on just weaving through a little bit more contrast. I'm maybe going to just use a little bit more Prussian blue in my mixture here, and then let me get into some information here in these leaves, in these little yellow kind of cone flowers. Here we go. I'm just wanting to keep like some nice loose marks happening that, you know, really just give it like a dynamic quality and keep you moving through this whole mess of greenery. So this is a time when I have to really kind of fight against getting too static and losing that freshness, because I'm focusing on like zeroing in on details, right? And like committing to edges and describing things a little bit. It's really, this is the hard part for me, and this is the interesting thing about painting, I think, that, hold on, need to find sap green. Yeah, that like you can always kind of like work around a particular problem. How do you make it look finished and descriptive and also like keep it really loose? And that, to me, is a very interesting problem. Once I've sort of separated out enough with darks, I'm going to go back through and kind of create a few more marks with like a mid-tone and a light. And I'm just extending the value range that I'm using little by little. And now I'm sort of emphasizing some of these like lighter marks that I kind of scratched into the surface in an earlier layer. And I'm going back and kind of painting around them with the intention of making them look like very lightly painted, very loosely described flowers. Let's see if it happens. Too dark. Just feel like this description, this little edge right here really needed to happen. That was really fun to do. And I feel a little bit bored by the dark kind of drawing stage right now. So I'm ready to kind of just let myself depart from that for a second. Wow. All right, so currently I'm just finding this little kind of teal blue color that I really liked against this yellow. And so I thought I would just kind of incorporate that in for a second. And in addition to sort of using it here in these leaves, I've been kind of working that through into this picture because I have been debating how finished I want this picture to be, and now I think I sort of know where I want to go with it, having found that color. So that was all very useful. And I mean by no, I certainly don't want to give you the impression that I have a firm and complete idea of exactly where I'm going with this, but I do have a feeling and I have something to try. I have a next step that I want to see, and that is usually good enough. So let's start with that. And my idea was that I wanted to get a little closer to kind of real life with this picture and make it feel a little bit more solid, where earlier I had imagined that this would be like a really unfinished area and just kind of go into an unfinished background in this amazing and beautiful and graceful way. I've kind of given up on that. I think we're going to fill that in. I think we're going to finish this and just develop this little area. So you never know, right? Like when you start, you don't know exactly what things will become, and that's what's fun about it for me. Okay, so I'm gonna do a little mixing, and then let's just look at the palette for that, just in case that's of interest. I'm gonna move this up a little bit so you can see it, and I'll try to mix here-ish. Okay, and what I wanna do is use some Prussian blue, use some cobalt teal, a little ultramarine, and then burnt umber. Look how much paint I'm getting. If you can kind of see that. It's not like a gentle situation here. I'm like really scraping up this like deep green color. And what I'm looking for, here we go back to the painting, is a color for the shadow area of this picture. I think I like it. Let's try it. So it really has a good bite against the current color has an effect. It definitely sinks back. It sort of pops, you know. Some colors just don't do much against each other, but because this is like a very deep green here against that like reddish color, it's working. And then I think against like this lighter lavender, it's really a nice color contrast too. But I don't think this is going to be the only color. I want to create probably a value similar to this, maybe a little bit more violet, and kind of weave that through. I see an almost, you know, violet color through here. So I'm just doing like little variations, you know, it shouldn't be all one color. It's a missed opportunity for sure. And again, just like keeping that paint moving on the canvas. So you're not like painting a house, you're not painting a wall, you're kind of creating this motion and describing the surface, even with the way that you put the paint on the surface. Work around so that it doesn't feel like you've just kind of plunked an entirely new area onto your painting. You want to like weave it in. It's like, you know, if I wish, this is one thing I wish I knew how to do, was like to darn or like repair sweaters or like weaves, you know. I do not know how to do that, but one day maybe I'll learn. And I think it might be similar to this because you can't really just, you know, plunk it on the surface. You really do have to make sure that the things that you're adding sort of get added everywhere so that they feel harmonious. And I'm just like finding little areas that I like, and I'm trying to emphasize them with a little bit of value contrast. If there's an area that feels just kind of like too flat, maybe I'll break it up with a little mark to indicate, you know, there's more going on in that little shadow shape. All right, and now we are back to this very new color. And how are we gonna make this work? Well, I had a class this morning, and I think the theme of that class was don't work in one area. If you're thinking about one area, work in a different area. And as confusing as that sounds, let me show you what I mean. For example, I'm thinking about these darker leaf colors, but I've spent a whole lot of time developing the dark colors today. So instead of just barreling more paint, more thought, more work into these dark colors, I'm going to try to give them a little bit more context by working on the items next to the dark areas. So we're just going to put on a few little lighter marks so that we give some context. Not really to develop the light objects, more like to give the dark something to like come up against, you know? All right, and then I'm going to show you my palette as I mix this color. Yay, we're flipped. Okay. All right, and believe it or not, this is for that kind of yellow-green, like coneflower type flower. And I've got some yellow ochre and sap green here, and then I've got some quinacridone, and I'm gonna mix that in. And that's very orangey, and I might take some of this cobalt teal off to the side. And that's gonna create that beautiful green with it. But I don't want it to get too green. So now I've just kicked in some like cadmium yellow, medium. I also cannot mix at this height. All right, so if you can kind of see how I started with this color, this pink, I mixed up this like pretty wild looking green with some cobalt teal and sap, and then with yellow ochre and cadmium yellow medium, I got this amazing, like really vibrant kind of mustard green color. And that is what I think we will be using. So let's see how that works. Here we go. We'll get a small brush. Never find just the right brush. You know what I mean? All right. Well, this is a very, very short little brush that is called a Bright. It's so short. There's almost no bristles. But it is nice for making these little kind of chunky marks over here. And I'm just going to take that and see if I like. It's okay. It's okay. Now I am going to lighten this color a little tiny bit, and I'm going to go with like a little bit of our lighter yellow and a touch of white just to bring out a little more value contrast. And then we're going to start to layer some marks to bring that texture out of the form. This kind of filled in. Brush doesn't hold a whole lot of paint, so what I did was I just kind of brush mixed a little bit of a deeper, darker greenish color. So this is a little bit of contrast, just sort of starting to build into this. lighter colors a little bit. And I'm seeing like how we can kind of, I'm gonna take this yellowy green color and really give it like a bit of a cooler green here against this pink. And now I'm putting on super thick kind of finishing paint for these little flower areas. And I like that little light blue edge against the pink. And I think we'll play that up a little bit more by kind of carrying some marks into the leaves. So I'm using the same color as I just used on the edge of that flower. And I think that it is a pretty decent blue-green that's going to help me kind of pick out some of these characteristics of this area over here. It's pretty much the light color. You do have to be careful. This is a very high contrast color. These marks are not going to be easy to redo. It's possible. And chances are I'll need to touch something up or rework something, or I'll run into problems. But I am trying to be careful as I put on this paint. And by being careful, I mean, you know, do I have the brush loaded up? Is it the right color? Am I really seeing where I want to put the mark before I place it on the canvas? So far I haven't even really wiped off this little the brush that I was using, that tiny little short bristle brush. I'm just like scraping up paint. And because that paint is going on very thickly and I'm not pressing that hard, it's not really mixing, and I can kind of switch colors this way. But you have to be careful, it doesn't last forever. If things lose their punch and get a little bit muddy, it's time to switch it up. But I do love this little brush. You're almost using like the side of the brush is picking up more paint than the bristles, essentially. So it's kind of close to palette knife painting in a way. Some brushes you're really like dragging the paint over the surface, but this one you're just like placing it on almost like you have a palette knife. I also love that for picking up paint that's a little bit kind of mixed up on the palette, like it's not one solid color. And I find that you can get some really interesting descriptive brush strokes in there. I mean, I just went from like green to red, and I am not, or red to green rather, and I am not even wiping off my brush. So, now I'm not advocating that you should try and, you know, just don't wipe your brush ever, it's fine. Do what works. But right now, things are kind of working, and I'm not needing to change brushes, change the size of my brush. So I know this is a bit of a unpopular opinion to paint with one tiny brush. But people, this is what I do. Not throughout the painting, and I don't teach people to do this, but this is something that I myself have sort of developed. So, take it or leave it. We're gonna do a little bit more in these little pink flowers as long as we are on this little brush kick. And after that, I think we're gonna go into the background and freshen that paint up and add a little bit more paint. to think about where these light petals are going to land, because that creates this sense of like movement and rhythm that interacts with these. And this is kind of my main focal point. So I can't do something here that's going to really detract too much from that. I want to be careful. All right, let's put some stems in, a little contrasting color. And then we're going to bring these lights forward just a little. Okay. Let's cut in. Just want to like kind of tie these areas into this little kind of flowy, drapey area. Maybe add a little bit more interest toward the central grouping here, and a little less away, so we're not like bringing people way out. I want this to fade, and it is not quite fading the way I would like that. So we're just gonna continue to lessen the contrast. as it moves out, I'm going to mix in some magenta into this color. All right. I feel like before I move on, I have a really useful green right now. And we're just gonna balance what we just did on the other side. And I am sort of looking at the setup. I'll find an area that kind of makes sense to me, that I'm seeing a nice shadow shape, and I'll approximate that. So I'm not just completely following every little change perfectly, but I'm definitely not painting from entirely a made-up composition either. Just kind of using that information. Kind of working between the very top of the picture and the very bottom of the picture, because those are like have to be addressed at the same time. I think if you're like painting a portrait, kind of like doing two eyes to work a little on one and a little on the other. think just paint quality wise, this area needs some more development. I don't so much mind it like visually what's there, but it's just not up to where it needs to be at. And that's okay. It will get there. Really going to emphasize this little object, some nice heavy paint around it. I'm just kind of looking at this and noticing there's all this beautiful color transition, almost like dappled light kind of situation happening from the light source being blocked. So, I don't know, at this point it seems like just taking straight cobalt teal and just sort of blending wet into wet is giving me the effect that I'm kind of liking right now. I do think we are going to lose quite a bit of this value here. It's too light. And then for the form, I know I need to get a little lighter here. I'm trying to build that up, kind of going roundabout through the shadows, not really settling on what is plant, reflection, or shadow. I'm just trying to keep it really loose and lots of marks. And I just mixed that cobalt teal color with quinacridone magenta. And I think that's working for me. I'm going to use this to get things a little bit more defined. And then using a very similar color that I sort of mixed from that purpley green, I am getting these leaves a little bit more described and developed. All right, that might be enough with the green there. And here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna take this palette knife and we are going to recycle a little place and maybe some of this color. So that is quinacridone red and magenta. My goal here is to really put some paint into the background. So I'm going to use some of my oil to extend it and kind of work it around. I don't want to cover all of the variation. So I've got my rag handy and I'm just like wiping out my brush after every few marks, or that's the plan. And I'll work around a little bit and I will brush mix and have multiple colors on my brush at once for some interest. As you know, we're not going to put that paint on too flat. We're not going to paint a room like this. We're just kind of dragging the brush, give it some interest, give it some movement. And with this bigger brush, I'm just kind of flying through here and keeping this background paint really loose. Hopefully the color will stay nice and clean. So far, so good. And I'm mostly following along with what's there, but there are areas that I'm definitely going to be changing. There's just no way to leave them quite as such. indication of some shadow. And right now I'm just kind of like just taking a little break to paint out all the way to my edges. So take it from me, this is definitely something you're going to want to pause and do occasionally. Just make sure you're getting finished to each side of the canvas. Well, it looks like it is getting closer, but not done. As you all know, sometimes paintings slow down towards the end. But, you know, we are closer. So next time I plan to finish the painting and hope you can join me then.